Hi, Jeremy. Look, we've been talking about Ukraine, obviously.
I just caught the end of it. I'm sort of between events and appointments at the minute, but I just caught the end of what Richard was saying.
The thing that horrifies me is that we're sending weapons into Ukraine. I mean, if we give the Ukrainians more weapons, the Russians will just bring more weapons as well. It will kill more people, won't it?
There is a horrible escalation danger that's going on, but I thought the story this morning that there's a possibility of a discussion between Russia and Ukraine, albeit they didn't agree where the discussion would take place, is slightly promising news, because I think we just cannot underestimate the horror of what's happening in Ukraine at the moment and what's happening to people's lives, and as Richard pointed out, the long-term bitterness that's going to come. Even if there was a ceasefire today, the anger and the bitterness of all those lives that have been lost are going to go on for a very, very long time.
Yeah, and I saw you on a Zoom yesterday comparing the situation in 1914 with people who were calling it for peace then being shut down. Do you feel this intimidation against anti-war people is the same? It's gone off the scale. I'm not familiar with this myself. I've been abused as well just for saying we should have peace and fight for that.
Well, there's a good line in the Bible: "Blessed are the peacemakers." But I do think the degree of intolerance that has grown up in the last fortnight towards anyone that argues for any kind of peaceful outcome is very bad and very unfortunate. And the comparison I was making yesterday was that in 1940, Keir Hardie, the leader of the Labour Party, had done his best to promote working class unity across Europe, and spoke at an enormous rally in Trafalgar Square on the eve of the First World War. Everybody was agreed they were against the war. Within a few days, the war had started, and he was shouted down in the House of Commons by Labour and Tory MPs for arguing against the First World War. And many of those that protested against the First World War at that time ended up in prison as conscientious objectors. But Keir Hardie died during the First World War, but after the First World War, Fenner Brockway, George Lansbury, and many, many others, some of whom had been in prison, were venerated and went on to become huge and enormous figures within the Labour movement. Now, I'm not saying this is the comparison of 1914, but there is an enormous danger that if there isn't a cessation of the Russian advance into Ukraine and a ceasefire and an agreement of some sort for the future, then the danger is that the war will spread and go into other places. And I think, as Richard pointed out, even if the Russian forces succeed in occupying all of Ukraine, what do they do then? What happens after that? Because they then have either got to withdraw and put somebody else in place, or they're going to face long-term opposition from the Ukrainian people, because the anger and the bitterness isn't going to go away anytime soon. This is a very, very dangerous moment indeed.
I mean, the other thing I was thinking about was if Russia feels that it's being pushed in and this conflict carries on and on and on, they'll find other ways of like terror. I mean, there might even be, like what happened in the Middle East, you'd have terror attacks from people because they can't make their point known in the conflict. I mean, that's the sort of, we don't know how far this could go if we don't stop escalating it.
Indeed, the danger is that everything just continues to escalate and get worse and worse. And so we have to look to the long term. Now, just suppose we get in short order, a ceasefire and some sort of longer term negotiations as to the future security of the region. We're almost back to a sort of 1990-91 process when there was agreement on the recognition of the independence of Ukraine by Russia and by the West. And there was then the Minsk agreements, which took into account the problems of the Donbass region and what would happen there and whether there should be a degree of autonomy or not and so on. But that ultimately is a decision that should be made by the people of the Donbass and made by the people of Ukraine. And so these are dangerous times, but I do think that there has to be some thoughts in a longer term process. What I also would hope is that if we can turn this thing around quickly into a process of ceasefire stroke negotiations, there can then be a very wide, including Russian and Western participation in the Vienna talks on the nuclear ban treaty, which the UN are convening at this summer in Vienna. So far, the declared nuclear weapon states have all declined to take part in it, but the rest of the world has taken part in it.
Finally, Jeremy, I just wondered what your take was on the way that those 11 MPs, the Labour MPs, were made to withdraw their signature from the Stop the War letter. It just seems like there's no pluralism in the Labour Party, no room for voices of different opinions. I mean, Tony Benn would certainly not have been treated like that when he was in the party. He was always standing against the whip, wasn't he?
Well, Tony Benn and I often dissented from many things in Parliament, and sometimes we were in a very small minority in so doing. Again, going back not so far in history as World War I, but during the Vietnam War, there were dissenting voices, and they were, I suppose you can generously say, tolerated within the Parliamentary Labour Party, and then became substantially stronger. Even further back than that, there were those like Tony who dissented from the colonial war in Kenya in the 1950s. And then later on, when Tony was one of a very small number to call for a negotiated peace over the Falklands conflict, he spoke out in Parliament against it memorably. The public opposition to the war was not huge. I took part in some of those protests. During the Gulf War of 1991, there were only, I think, 17 of us voted against the Gulf War, and about 450 or 500 MPs voted for it. I was at no stage threatened with losing the whip. I was at no stage threatened with my position or status in the party any more than Tony was, even though we were in a tiny minority. We knew we were a tiny minority. And on Iraq, there were sort of mutterings, but no more than that. But in the end, 140 Labour MPs voted against Iraq, likewise on Afghanistan. But the idea that you will intimidate people for signing a letter which had an analysis of how this had come about, which I understand some people on the centre of the right of the party don't agree with that analysis, but it is an analysis that was put forward and was signed by those, and they were clearly under some sort of threat. I was a founder member of the Stop the War Coalition in 2001, and I've been active in opposing war. But actually, the Stop the War Coalition is what it says on the label. It is the Stop the War Coalition. So I think we need to just remember that the history will look back and say, well, actually, was the analysis right? Was the analysis wrong? But the immediate thing has to be big demonstrations against the war. And I'm very heartened by the numbers of people in Russia who have come out against the war, big demonstrations of predominantly, but not exclusively, young people in St. Petersburg and Moscow and many other cities, including even Vladivostok, so far away, to oppose this war. That's something that gives me some heart. And I've looked very carefully at the very interesting message sent by Boris Kargalitsky and others. We need to reach out to the left in Russia as much as we need to reach out to the left in Ukraine and elsewhere. Peace can only come through internationalism.
Right, and that's what you're doing a lot with your Peace and Justice project.
Well, absolutely, that's exactly what the Peace and Justice Project is about bringing about those international connections. And I have to say, I know the immediate news is always dominant in our minds and so on. But if you look at some of the overall trends in the world, they are promising. Look at the election results across Latin America and the wonderful election of Gabriel Boric in Chile and the election victory in Honduras and other places. And then look at the growth of green social justice movements around the world. So it's not exclusive environmentalism to protect the clean air of the moneyed few. It is about environmentalism, which improves the living standards and life expectancy and life chances of the entirety of the population. You can't do that in a free market economy. So I think things are changing. But if we allow those that would spend more and more on arms, more and more on weapons, and yet another generation of nuclear weapons, then quite simply, the money isn't going to be there for health, for social care, for education, for housing, and all these things. And we're going to see a diminution of the public services that we are entitled to. So let's link the issues together. And so yesterday there were many demonstrations around the world, and there was a call made during that on March the 6th, we have a global day calling for peace in the Ukraine. And I think we all need to get behind that. That's next Sunday.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming on. Really appreciate you coming. I know you're busy.